Hey romance writers, it is Jenna Harte with Write With Her, and today we're going to be talking about how to write chemistry in romance novels. So what is it that makes romance fiction so popular? I would argue that what makes romance novels so popular is the roller coaster ride of falling in love. But beyond the emotional ups and downs that a romance provides, for a reader to really love a romance, they need to feel the snap, crackle, and pop between the characters. In other words, they need to feel the chemistry. But what is chemistry? In my mind, chemistry between characters is a little like porn. It's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. The best definition I can come up with is that chemistry between characters is the palatable electric current that sizzles between two characters. Now, it's important to note that chemistry doesn't necessarily mean lust. Even in sweet romances that don't have any sensuality or touching, readers still need to feel the connection between the couple. Now, before we talk about how to write chemistry, let's talk a little bit about the stages of romantic chemistry. Now, let's start with physical attraction, which probably needs no explanation. Basically, it's lust. There are many romances that start with this initial physical attraction. The next type of attraction is personal attraction, and this is something that evolves as the characters get to know each other on a deeper level. While there are many romances that start at the physical attraction level, there are some that start at this level of personal attraction. We see this mostly in the friends to lovers romance. The final type of attraction is emotional attraction, which is essentially love, but speaks to a deeper connection, to a connection that is soul deep. In a romance novel, this emotional attraction is really your end goal. It's where you're trying to get your characters to end up in their HEA. So knowing these different levels of attraction, what does that mean for the type of chemistry your characters need? By the end of your romance book, your characters should have all three of the above attraction levels, although of course in a sweet romance, we're not going to see any of the physical elements of that attraction. Now, at the beginning of the book, they usually have one, maybe two of these attraction levels. So they might be physically attracted to each other, and they might also be personally attracted to each other. Again, friends to lovers would be an example of that type of book. It is actually possible to have all three of those attraction levels in the opening of a book. But usually it's going to be one-sided, such as a man who's in love with his neighbor but believes she just sees him as a friend. He could be physically attracted to her, personally attracted to her, and emotionally in love with her. And of course, one of the things that makes romances fun is that she could be thinking the same thing about him. Or maybe not. In a sweet romance, you won't have the physical attraction of lust, but there should still be a non-sensual pull between the couple. So now let's talk about how you write this. And this is where things can get a little bit tricky because in romance, chemistry can be very difficult to describe. One of the problems is that for many novice writers, they tend to use telling to illustrate chemistry. For example, he was hot and she wanted him. Or they get too technical, writing details of tab A inserted into slot B during an intimate bit. So here are ways to write chemistry and intimacy into your romance. The first thing, and probably one of the best things you can do, is to write using the senses. What makes romances really work is when it taps into emotions and sensations, and writing from the senses helps you do that. Now, of course, when writing spicier romances or erotica, these sensations are going to include things like titillation. But even in sweet romance, the reader needs to feel the swoon and the pitter-patter of the heart. And creating those emotions and sensations are best done by using the senses: sight, sound, touch, scent, and taste. Essentially, your goal here is that there should be a something, a je ne sais quoi that sizzles or crackles in the air when our lovebirds are together. And again, that is true even in a sweet romance where we need to feel that there's a connection, a pull between the two, even if it isn't sensual. The other thing you can do is to create chemistry with dialogue. One option is to use banter or teasing or playful dialogue. Using banter is a way to show that the characters are attuned to each other, and it hints at a growing familiarity. But you can also use dialogue that hints to deep conversations. Moments of deep conversation are the parts that drive the chemistry from a surface level to a more personal and emotional level. And these moments involve more honesty and vulnerability. Another form of dialogue that can help with chemistry is miscommunication. Things like an overheard conversation taken out of context, a message left undelivered, or words spoken in the heat of the moment all drive a wedge between the characters. But of course, this is a romance, so even with the wedge, they're simultaneously being pulled together. This adds tension and evokes a sense of yearning. Another way to drive up chemistry in your romance is to use close proximity. While all romances need to have reasons for our characters to continue to be around each other, physical proximity sets a stage for fireworks. Forced proximity includes things like being stuck in an elevator, snowed in at a cabin, becoming roommates, sharing an office, a road trip, etc. And why this works in helping generate chemistry is that being forced together accelerates the intimacy. With no escape from each other's presence, every movement and breath is magnified. And it's often in these close spaces that the barriers break down, conversations deepen, and true feelings often rise to the surface. Another way to boost up chemistry is to use anticipation. Do you remember the ketchup commercial that used to use that song, Anticipation, while we waited for that thick ketchup to come out of the bottle? You can build tension and chemistry using that same idea. Ways that you can build this anticipation include slowing down time. And you can do this even in scenes in which the couple collide in a fast and furious frenzy. You can slow down the moments before to increase the tension and anticipation of what's to come. And you can draw out these moments by focusing on sensory elements like we talked about before. Another way to boost anticipation is through slow burn. By delaying the inevitable connection, authors can cultivate a deep and smoldering chemistry that keeps readers engaged. Writing a slow burn is a masterclass in patience where every interaction is charged with a quiet intensity and the eventual culmination feels like a sweet release, no pun intended. You can also create anticipation through interrupted moments. Interruptions are frustrating, but they are effective at interrupting a growing tension. Just when characters are about to bridge the gap between them, an unexpected phone call or a sudden downpour or a nosy friend bursts into the scene, leaving them and the readers yearning for more. You can also build anticipation through internal conflicts. The most powerful barriers to romance often aren't the external ones, but those that reside within the characters themselves. Fears of vulnerability, past traumas, or worries about jeopardizing other areas of life, such as friendships or jobs, can create internal battles that keep our lovers apart. So finally, let's talk about chemistry in intimate bits. Now remember, in the beginning, I defined chemistry as the palatable sizzle between a couple, but not that it was necessarily sensual or titillating. It's important for writers, particularly those that are going to write sexy bits, because sexy bits can't do all the heavy lifting to get an emotional bond between our lovers. So in essence, chemistry can be built using intimate bits, but these bits don't automatically create chemistry. Now, the very best intimate scenes use many of the elements that we have already mentioned above, like using the senses and anticipation and banter. But here are a few other things you need to consider when you are writing sexy bits. The first is that a sexy bit scene needs to serve a purpose. You need to have a reason for this intimate bit to exist beyond just the titillation, unless, of course, you're writing erotica. Intimate scenes need to do all the things that other scenes do, which drive the story forward or reveal something about the character. The other thing to remember in intimate bits is that less is usually more. Consider the words of short story writer and poet Raymond Carver, who said, "Get in, get out, don't linger, go on." Okay, so in a sexy bit, you may want to linger a little bit, but the point is you don't want to fill up the scene with adverbs and flowery language or technical aspects of the deed. When writing intimate scenes, focus on the senses, emotions, and thoughts that romance readers crave. You want to avoid writing a play-by-play, choreographed, intimate bit. In this case, I'm not saying that you can't describe what's physically happening, but focusing on the actions of tab A into slot B isn't very romantic. Romance and titillation comes from the brain, which requires more than just a play-by-play of who's touching who where. Sensations, emotions, and thoughts all enhance what is going on in an intimate bit. Some of the very sexiest or most emotionally satisfying sensual scenes I've ever read had very little in the way of who was touching who, when, and where. Another thing you want to look out for when you're writing intimate scenes is to watch out for hilarious euphemisms. One of my favorite euphemisms is throbbing love thruster. I think that is hilarious and of course would never actually use it. So why do romance writers use euphemisms? Basically, they're used to avoid writing the technical or clinical body parts. And they do this because clinical isn't necessarily very romantic, or maybe they are embarrassed to use some of the other terms that could be used, or maybe they just want to use a softer language. Whatever the reason, if you're not going to use the true word body parts, watch that you don't use words or phrases that will make the reader snicker when they're supposed to be swooning. Now, I'll be honest that this can be a little subjective. I think we can all agree that throbbing love thruster won't work. But what about something like flower of her femininity? Now, I'll be honest, it's not a term that I would use, but others do use it. And this is where your critique group or your alpha readers can help you make a decision about whether the terms you're using fit with the story or if there's something that might make the reader snicker. Now, for many writers, writing these intimate bits is sort of embarrassing, and that can come through in your writing. But what you need to consider is what your characters' attitudes and the language they use for these body parts or for sex. For example, would the female character in your romance refer to her breasts as boobies or breasts or tits? And of course, in a heterosexual romance, how would the male character refer to them? Now, if you'd like to increase your sexy bit vocabulary, there are phrasing books out there, or you can visit Write with Heart and check out our Other Ways to Say spreadsheet, which has section on sexy words. This is for members only, but membership is free. The other thing you need to consider when writing intimate bits is to make sure that it fits the mood or goal of the scene. Remember, we already talked about that these intimate bits need to be there for a reason. They do need to have a purpose to be there. In a romance, sex isn't just sex. Sometimes it's fun and playful. Sometimes it's fast and furious. But other times, it's like a lazy Sunday morning. Now, however you write your intimate or sensual bit, it should fit with everything else that's going on. And this doesn't just apply to the actual choreography of the scene, but the feelings and thoughts experienced by the couple as well. For example, if the couple has hit the limit of sexual tension and can't stand it anymore, but they are also enemies, their encounter isn't likely to be slow and romantic or playful, although it could be funny in a situation like a rom-com. So that's it for this week's video. If you would like to read a text version of how to write chemistry and romance novels, which also includes some sample writing, you can do so by visiting writewithheart.com, and I will have a link directly to the post in the description below. If you have any other tips about writing chemistry or sensuality in romance, or maybe you have feedback or questions, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Also, I want to invite you to visit writewithheart.com. It's a free online community for romance authors where you can have a profile and start a blog. You can access a growing library of tools and resources. We've got groups. We have tips and industry news. We have weekly Zoom calls for support and camaraderie and a whole lot more. And I think I already mentioned it, but let me say it again. It is free to join. I will have the link to Write with Heart in the description below. I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time, this is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.